I was like, we could start here because we still have to introduce ourselves. And then we could focus in on each other.
And we could just say, we're just gonna talk about Mexico.
Yeah. Cool. We're just gonna chat.
I'm down.
Go.
Go.
We're going.
We're going.
So hi, my name is Abby.
And I am Diamond.
Ezra.
And I'm Jeff.
And we're just going to talk about Mexico and our different approaches to studying the country and the people, the political structures, and just anything that we really had an interest in throughout the class.
So I kind of wrote all my papers in a historical narrative point of view. So started with the pre-colonial times in Mexico, so starting with the first known tribe, the Olmecs in that area, and then kind of went as after contact and the entradas of Hernan Cortez, and then kind of talked about the social structures in the colonial period, including the church in these communities and how that developed into the social institutions of New Spain and how they kind of developed their identity separate from New Spain until they were recognized as kind of a power of their own in that way. That's kind of what I talked about.
Yeah. During my papers, I kind of focused in on how women tried to create their own identity, because in this kind of society, a patriarchal society, women usually were under the control or power of like the patriarchal figures in their lives, like whether it be like their fathers, their guardians, really even like the priests would have some sort of control over them. And I kind of focused in on Sor Juana, and we watched like a video of her also. And I just felt it was interesting how she kind of changed the way people thought of women in her writings, because she was able to kind of break away from the traditional role that women usually had in this kind of society, or any really feminine figure. But I also thought it was interesting that she was able to join the convent when like it was more normal for people to like just get married and have like their own kind of family, but she didn't want that kind of life, and she noticed these kinds of double standards in society that made it like just common for women to just join that kind of lifestyle. But she changed that, and then she critiqued that kind of double standard, which I thought was just, yes, good work.
And I didn't really go so individual in my analysis as much as I went almost a historical narrative, but I stuck kind of more along the lines of following Mexico's independence from Spain, how they started with this period of kind of political turmoil, followed by this unification and the whole introduction of the idea of Mexican nationalism, and how that carried through into the war between the U.S. and Mexico. I touched on that relationship a lot, and finally I talked about how in politics-wise, how Mexico's history is different than the rest of Latin America in this 70-year like centrist party rule with the PRI, which had followed a like 30-year dictatorship under Porfirio Diaz, and this whole contrast between like political turmoil and political continuity that you don't really see in other places.
Yeah, well, I think an important thing when we're talking about Mexico is the development of their identity. I think that's kind of what we
Mexican nationalism and
touched on exactly throughout even the colonial period of as their contact with the rest of the world at that point being the first time they were able to establish that relationship was when the Spanish conquered them for the most part. So their development of their culture, how people used the new Spanish institutions to create a culture of their own, which I think is important for Mexico.
You see it very heavily with I call the influences of the church, like just within their society, like the way families are created, like just like the creation of families, like how like that was a big thing.
Yeah, the relationship dynamic is dictated not only by these roles that are enforced through the church, but these roles that are enforced through years and years of indigenous heritage,
That's right.
combined with the Spanish influence that they brought from Europe, and you end up with this really unique mix of indigenous and European culture that like emerged as the mestizaje, as this idea of Mexican nationalism.
Right, and then it created through those two mixes an identity of their own that was sovereign from Spain. We saw that in the revolutions, and then the renationalization of their businesses.
Yeah.
So we're no longer European.
Yeah.
Exactly.
However, we are a Mexican identity.
We're no longer trying to get the foreign aid of any kind. They're just trying to create it for themselves.
Right, and it's interesting how this whole thing started with, Europeans looking for gold, and it ends with Mexicans and oil.
Yeah.
And so you go from, the people that are coming to exploit these natural resources and ending up at a fully sovereign country who has discovered these natural resources and are now taking the steps to, harness those and fund the creation of their own country. And Mexico.
You also see it in the independence movement, though, and like how it was usually like indigenous identity that kind of fueled the revolutions.
That's right.
Because like they would focus with, I want to say like the Zapatistas were there.
Yeah, Emilio Zapata and Pancho Villa.
Yeah.
The second Mexican
So that was part of
Revolution.
the agrarian land reform of
Yes.
taking back Mexico from the wealthy elitists who actually related themselves more to Spain, and that helped with the finding that Mexican identity separate from the Spanish one.
Exactly.
So I think we just kind of gave you an overview of how many interests you could look into when you're studying Mexico.
How many facets there are to not only the political and economic history, but really looking into the culture of Mexico and how it has developed from pre-contact until, following the revolution, both revolutions.
And how it's still changing, even as we see it today.
So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
So long.
Adios.